My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 46 years old, and 3 days ago my mother-in-law turned my identity to ashes while looking me straight in the eyes with a victorious smile. You see, some people believe silence is weakness, but in my world, silence is simply the time it takes me to calculate how much it's going to cost you to disrespect me. As the flames consumed the pages of my passport in the backyard, she threw a sentence at me that sealed her fate. "You're not going anywhere. You'd better stay right here and take care of the pigs, that's all you're good for." In that moment, she thought she had taken away my freedom. What she really did was strip away the very last trace of mercy I still had for her and for her daughter. She had no idea that the trip she had just ruined wasn't just a vacation. It was the beginning of the end of her parasitic comfort. While the black smoke rose into the sky, I was already running the numbers in my head, figuring out exactly how to leave her out on the street, broke, with no one for company except the very animals she loved to mention. If you like stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, hit like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how we ended up with that fire in the backyard, you need to understand who I was before my home turned into a nest of vipers. My life had always been about order and structure. I'm a structural architect, a man who makes a living measuring resistance, calculating loads, and making sure buildings don't collapse under pressure. Ironically, I never applied that same precision to my personal life. I married Emily 12 years ago. Back then, she seemed like a woman with ambition, but over time I realized her only real ambition was inertia. When her father died 5 years ago, I made the mistake that any man with a misplaced sense of responsibility would make. I allowed her mother, Beatrice, to move in with us. At first it was supposed to be temporary. A few months so she could recover from grief, they said. But months turned into years, and Beatrice settled into my house like dampness seeping into the foundation until everything started to smell rotten. Beatrice is a country woman, but not the kind who works the land. She's the kind who commands it. She always carried that stale air of superiority. The kind of woman who believes the world owes her something just for growing old. My house, designed by me to be a place of peace, slowly filled with her noise, her constant criticism, and eventually her demands. She didn't just live there for free. She expected me to be her personal servant. Emily, my wife, became a shadow of her mother. A daughter's loyalty is understandable, but what happened in my home was a complete abdication. Emily stopped working, stopped trying, and dedicated herself to being Beatrice's lieutenant. I was the provider, the one paying the bills, the one maintaining the lifestyle, but at my own table I felt like a stranger. They lowered their voices when I entered a room, shared private jokes, and looked at me with a kind of contempt reserved only for someone who is no longer respected. Still, I endured. I kept my calm, focused on my work and my savings. I built a solid estate, including a rural property I had inherited from my own family, a piece of land with a functioning farm that I leased to third parties. That place was my escape valve, my retirement plan. But Beatrice always had her eye on it. She wanted me to leave the city, move there and manage the farm so she could live like a matriarch surrounded by animals and servants. To her, my city career was a waste of time. The conflict escalated when I announced I had been selected for an international architecture seminar in Europe. It was a 3-week trip, an incredible opportunity for my career, and honestly, a much-needed break from the suffocating atmosphere of my home. I paid for everything myself: business class tickets, top-tier hotels, registration fees. Beatrice was furious. She said that money should have been used to remodel the kitchen to her taste, or to buy new equipment for the farm she already considered hers. Emily didn't defend me. "My mum is right, Ethan. You're selfish. You're going off to enjoy yourself while leaving us here alone," she told me one night as I packed. I didn't respond. I simply closed my suitcase and placed my passport on the nightstand. That was my mistake. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and when I came back, Beatrice was standing in my bedroom doorway with that expression of malicious satisfaction that only people who know they've won a dirty battle can wear. There were no screams, just the silence of the house and the heavy sound of her steps heading toward the backyard. I followed her, my stomach tied in knots. There, In the burn barrel we used for dry leaves, she dropped my passport. The fire was already lit. The flames licked the blue leather, and the pages filled with stamps from my former life. I stood frozen, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief at seeing so much cruelty concentrated in a single person. She turned to me, the firelight reflected in her small eyes, and delivered the sentence that still echoes in my head. "You're not going anywhere. You'd better stay here and take care of the pigs. That's all you're good for." Emily stood behind her, staring at the floor, saying nothing, accepting the crime through silence. In that moment, as the smell of burned paper filled the air, I understood I no longer had a family. I had parasites. And parasites aren't asked to leave. They're exterminated. I didn't scream. I didn't try to save the charred remains. I simply turned around and walked back into the house. My mind, trained to calculate structures, began demolishing the relationship that bound me to those women. If Beatrice wanted me to take care of the farm and the pigs, I would give her exactly what she wanted, but not in the way she expected. They thought they had broken my wings. What they really did was remove the weight that kept me from acting with complete coldness. My old life was over, and the reconstruction would be painful, not for me but for them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dim light of my study, listening to the muffled laughter coming from the master bedroom. Emily and her mother were celebrating my defeat with a level of complicity that turned my stomach. To them, the fact that I hadn't reacted with shouting or violence was proof of total submission. They thought the dog had finally been trained, that burning my passport had broken my spirit. They didn't understand that my calm was the silence that comes right before a poorly calculated building collapses. The next morning, the mood in the house was one of arrogant victory. Beatrice sat at the table and, without even looking at me, ordered me to pour her coffee. Emily was there too, spreading butter on her toast, avoiding my eyes, but wearing a faint smile. They were no longer my wife and my mother-in-law. They were two strangers who had taken possession of my space and my dignity. I said nothing. I poured the coffee with a steady hand, watching Beatrice savor her triumph. She started talking about plans for the farm, about how now that I had free time, I should begin moving my things there to oversee the construction of a new stable. The humiliation didn't stop there. Emboldened by my silence, Beatrice called her friends on the phone right in front of me. Between shrill laughs, she told them how she had put the traveler in his place, and how the man of the house would now finally dedicate himself to what truly mattered, serving the interests of his wife's family. Emily nodded along to everything. That was the moment I understood the depth of the betrayal. Emily wasn't just allowing the abuse, she was enjoying it. My humiliation gave her a way to balance her own mediocrity. If I fell, she didn't feel so small anymore. Days later, I discovered the betrayal went far beyond a burned passport. While reviewing my personal bank accounts, I noticed transactions I didn't recognize. Emily had been withdrawing money from our joint account and transferring it into a private account in her mother's name. These weren't small amounts. They were the savings I had set aside for maintaining my properties. They were bleeding me financially while I continued paying the mortgage, the utilities, and both of their comforts. They were emptying the ship before sinking it. The final blow came on a rainy afternoon. I came home from work and found my suitcases, the same ones I had packed for Europe, lined up in the hallway, this time filled with old clothes and farm junk. Beatrice was in the living room, her feet up on my walnut coffee table, a piece I had restored myself. She looked at me with surgical coldness and said, "Emily and I have decided it's no longer appropriate for you to live here full-time. We need the space for my things. We've prepared everything for you to move permanently to the farmhouse. The movers are coming tomorrow to take the rest of your books. You won't need them around the animals." Emily walked out of the kitchen, arms crossed. "It's for the best, Ethan. There's too much tension here. You'll be peaceful at the farm, taking care of what's ours. Mom will stay here with me to help redecorate." "What's ours?" She said it about a property my grandfather had left to me, one they had no legal right to, even though they behaved like absolute owners. They were kicking me out of my own home, the one I paid for, the one I maintained, treating me like an inconvenient tenant who was no longer useful. There was no explosion, no pleading. I walked up to Emily and looked straight into her eyes, searching for any trace of the man she once claimed to love. I found only the reflection of her mother's greed. I touched her shoulder, briefly, almost clinically, and she recoiled as if my touch burned. "All right," I said quietly. "If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. I'll go to the farm tomorrow." Beatrice laughed triumphantly. "See, honey? I told you he just needed a little push to understand his place." I left the room without looking back. That night, I slept on the floor, on a rug, surrounded by suitcases they had filled with a decade of contempt. As the cold from the floor seeped into my bones, my mind worked at full speed. They thought they were sending me into exile, to take care of pigs and live in filth. They had no idea they were giving me exactly what I needed, time and distance to execute a controlled demolition that would leave nothing standing. Being expelled from my home was the final nail in the coffin of my patience. From that moment on, I stopped being a husband and a son-in-law. I became a creditor, collecting an unpayable debt. I moved to the farm without protesting. I loaded my truck with the essentials and let them watch me drive away, head down, playing the role of a man who had accepted his fate among mud and the smell of manure. What they didn't know was that the moment I passed through the gate of that rural property, the architecture of my revenge had already been designed down to the last inch. My first move wasn't feeding pigs. It was calling Julian Carter, an old college friend who now ran a law firm specializing in asset protection and commercial law. Julian is like me. He doesn't believe in drama. He believes in contracts. We met at a quiet coffee shop, far from familiar eyes. I laid out the bank transfer records Emily had made to Beatrice's account, and most importantly, the deed to the city house. You see, Emily and Beatrice made a basic structural miscalculation. They assumed that because we were married, everything belonged to both of us. But the house they strutted around in like queens had been purchased with money from an inheritance I received before the marriage. I had made sure the property was held under a separate assets regime, one Emily had signed years earlier, back when she still pretended money didn't matter to her. "Ethan, this is a gift," Julian said as he reviewed the documents with professional calm. "Not only can we recover the transferred money for fraudulent management of shared assets, but I can initiate an immediate eviction process. They have no legal right to be there if you decide to sell." I smiled for the first time in weeks, but I didn't just want everything back. I wanted total impact. I wanted them to feel the ground disappear beneath their feet, the same way I had felt the fire consume my passport. My plan required patience. For 2 months, I played the role of the broken man. I sent them photos from the farm, complained about exhaustion, and asked for money for repairs. Money they, of course, denied with mocking text messages. Those messages were pure gold for my lawyer, documented proof of abuse, and their intent to exploit my assets. While they spent what remained of my savings remodeling their kitchen, I was quietly liquidating every asset I owned in that city. The final strategic piece was the farm. Beatrice was obsessed with it, but the farm was a tax burden I no longer wanted. I contacted an agribusiness company looking to expand its land. The deal was simple. I would sell the farm with an immediate occupancy clause. At the same time, I listed the city house slightly below market value to ensure a fast cash transaction. The buyer was an investment group that doesn't ask questions and has zero patience for delinquent occupants. During those weeks of preparation, I occasionally went back to the city house, always when Beatrice wasn't there, to collect important documents and valuables they hadn't noticed. Emily looked at me with a mix of pity and disgust. "You look old, Ethan." "The country isn't good for you," she said while filing her nails. I simply nodded, keeping the silence of someone who knows the detonator is already wired. I was selling their entire world behind their backs, piece by piece, contract by contract. The masterstroke was the trip. Using Julian's contacts, I obtained a duplicate of my passport and secured a work visa in a distant country for a consulting project I had accepted months earlier and kept secret. While they planned how to spend the summer at the farm, I was signing the sale documents for both properties. I left no loose ends. I hired a private security firm to secure the properties on the scheduled day, the moment the eviction became official. Revenge isn't an act of passion, it's asset management. and I was about to close the best deal of my life. The day of collapse arrived on a Tuesday morning, an ordinary day for them, but judgment day for their arrogance. Beatrice and Emily were at the city house, probably planning what else to buy with my money, when the moving trucks and court officers showed up at the door. I wasn't there in person. I didn't need the drama of screaming. I was a few miles away, watching everything through the security cameras they had forgotten I still controlled from my phone. Seeing Beatrice's face when the court officer handed her the eviction order was the best compensation for every insult I'd endured. She tried to scream, tried to slam the door shut, but the private security guards, hired by the new owners, simply blocked her. Not my problem anymore. I no longer owned that house. The investment group that bought it doesn't have feelings, only protocols. Emily ran out onto the porch frantic, dialing my number over and over. I watched my phone vibrate on the farmhouse table, but I didn't answer. I let the panic simmer. When I finally picked up, her voice was a shrill scream of desperation. "Ethan, there are men here saying you sold the house. They say we have 1 hour to get our things out. Do something." I kept my voice flat, almost bored. "Emily, I'm no longer the owner. You wanted me gone. And I left. I also sold the farm. The new owners of the rural property are on their way there right now. If you have anything you want to retrieve from the farmhouse, I suggest you run. The sales contract includes everything inside the barns and the main house." The silence that followed was absolute. I could picture Beatrice standing beside her daughter, listening. "But where are we supposed to go?" Emily asked in a thin voice. "Wherever the money from your illegal transfers takes you," I replied. "Julian, my attorney, has already filed the fraud lawsuit. Your accounts are frozen as a precaution. If I were you, I'd look for a cheap hotel, because whatever cash you have in your purse is all you've got left." I hung up. The climax wasn't a physical confrontation. It was the legal vacuum I left them in. Hours later, I was told Beatrice tried to get into the farm to rescue her expensive furniture, only to find that the new owners, the agribusiness company, had already fenced off the perimeter with barbed wire and guards. Her dream of being the matriarch of my land evaporated in the hot afternoon air. The woman who ordered me to take care of pigs ended up on the sidewalk surrounded by cheap suitcases and cardboard boxes, while workers changed the locks on what she once considered her castle. The greatest irony of all was the passport. While they cried on the street, I was at the airport. I pulled the new document from my pocket, the one they never knew existed. I looked at the photo, looked at the exit stamp, and felt a kind of freedom that can't be priced. There was no reconciliation. No final conversation to clear things up. People like Beatrice and Emily don't understand reason, they only understand loss. I left them without a house, without the farm, without access to my accounts, and with a lawsuit that would follow them for years. My revenge wasn't fire, it was ice. It was simply removing my hand and letting gravity finish what they had built, a rotten structure balanced on my back. Now I'm thousands of miles away, in a place where no one knows my last name and the air doesn't smell like betrayal. I've received emails from Emily's lawyers, desperate messages from mutual friends, and even a few empty threats from Beatrice's relatives. I haven't answered any of them, not out of hate, but out of absolute indifference, which is far more lethal. I've learned that respect is not something you negotiate, it's the foundation of every human structure. And when someone decides to burn it down, the only intelligent thing left to do is let the entire building collapse. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty for leaving 2 women alone and without resources. My answer is always the same. I didn't leave them with nothing. They chose to trade a provider for a burned passport and a handful of lies. They bet everything on my supposed weakness, and they lost. Life is a balance of loads and resistance. If you overload the one who's holding you up, all you accomplish is forcing that person to step away and let you fall into the void. Beatrice now lives in a rented room in a neighborhood she always looked down on, and Emily has been forced to take a job she never wanted, just to pay the legal fees of attorneys who are unsuccessfully trying to recover something, anything from what I sold. Their current reality is the cost of their arrogance. As for me, I keep designing, I keep building, but this time, I make sure the materials are genuine and that no one ever again has the power to set my future on fire. I've discovered that solitude in a foreign country is 1,000 times warmer than the company of people who despise you in your own home. I'm not looking for redemption or forgiveness. What I did was an act of architectural justice. I removed the elements that were causing my life to collapse. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, hit like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories.